Picture this. The horizon breaks with sails, and every sailor aboard a fat merchantman knows what that means. But instead of the thunder of cannon fire, instead of muskets cracking or cutlasses flashing, a single black flag unfurls into the wind. A skull leering from the canvas, bones crossed beneath. The Jolly Roger. And in that moment, before a shot is fired, the ship is already lost. Here's the secret the empires never wanted you to know. Pirates didn't thrive by slaughtering crews and sinking ships. They thrived by mastering fear itself. That flag wasn't cloth, it was theater, psychology, warfare without gunpowder. The sight of it told every merchant sailor, resist and you'll die screaming. Surrender and you'll live. And most men, staring at those grinning skulls, dropped their weapons before the first cannonball flew. But where did that flag come from? Who decided to trade powder and blood for bones and terror? That story is darker than most textbooks dare tell, because the Jolly Roger wasn't born in one port or stitched by one hand. It was the whispered invention of desperate men, shaped from superstition, stitched from execution rags, painted with blood and tar. And when the first pirate hoisted it, the world changed. Overnight, a symbol became a weapon, as deadly as any broadside. Empires scrambled to understand it. Merchants prayed they'd never see it. And captains found themselves haunted by it, even in dreams. But here's the twist. Not every pirate used the same flag. Some flew hourglasses dripping with sand, others skeletons piercing hearts with spears, some even devils dancing in fire. Each banner a promise, each an unspoken bargain between terror and mercy. And hidden in these banners was something else, a code, a signature, a history of mutiny and revenge. So when you see that skull and crossbones printed on t-shirts today, know this: it was once the most feared symbol on earth, not because of what pirates did, but because of what they didn't have to do. And if you follow me into chapter 1, I'll take you to the first time a black flag rose over a Caribbean horizon, and why the men who sewed it believed it was their best chance to survive in a world that wanted them hanged. The sea was calm the day the first black flag flew. That's what made it so unnerving: calm seas, steady winds, and then, without warning, terror stitched into canvas, rising like a curse. The merchant crew aboard the Providence saw it first as a smudge on the horizon, sails cut lean and sharp. They murmured about it, spat over the rail, prayed under their breath. But as the ship grew larger, its sails darker, they saw what no sailor wanted to see: a flag, black as midnight, climbing into the sky. On deck, Captain Hart of the Providence swore under his breath. Pirates, he'd seen them before, men who came screaming with pistols in both hands, cutlasses flashing, boarding hooks tearing into planks. But this time, no broadside came, no warning shot, no battle cry, only silence and that flagger skull, grinning wide, staring down from a canvas grave. The crew faltered. One man dropped his musket without realizing it. Another whispered, "It's Death himself, come for us." The boatswain shouted for them to ready arms. But the words felt hollow, swallowed by the sight of that flag. Across the water, the pirate ship closed in. Her name was the Revenant, and her captain, Bartholomew Firth, was no fool. He'd learned the truth, the hard way powder, and blood drained profit faster than any enemy broadside. Bodies had to be buried or burned, ships repaired, wounds tended. Every battle costs more than it earned, unless the battle was over before it began. Firth stood tall at the rail, coat flapping, his hands clasped behind his back. He gave no order to fire, no cry to board. His crew leaned against the guns with lazy grins, watching the panic ripple across the Providence's deck. When the merchant finally surrendered, lowering her sails and running up a white flag of her own, Firth smiled. He raised a hand and called across the water, "No blood today, lads. You'll keep your skins, but your cargo's ours." The relief on the merchant faces was almost painful to watch. They unloaded their goods without fight, their eyes darting again and again to that black flag, as though it might suddenly spring to life and consume them whole. Later that night, around the fire on the Revenant's deck, the men laughed about it. "Not a shot fired," one said, holding up a stolen bottle of rum. "That flag's worth 10 cannons. Firth only nodded. He understood what his crew did not. Fear was more reliable than powder, and symbols lasted longer than steel. But word travels fast on the sea. Soon other captains wanted their own banners. Some painted hourglasses, warning their victims that time was running out. Others drew skeletons holding spears, or devils dancing with fire. Each flag a message: surrender quickly and live. Resist, and you will die. The empires called it barbaric, uncivilized. But deep down, they knew the truth. Pirates had turned the tools of war into theater, and theater was more powerful than any broadside. By the time the skull and crossbones became the most recognized of them all, the Jolly Roger had already changed the rules of the game. And yet, even symbols have blood behind them. For every ship that surrendered, there were others that resisted. And when they did, pirates had to prove that their flag's promise of death wasn't just paint and cloth, it was truth written in gunpowder and screams. One such night, the black flag failed to terrify, and the price was paid in a tide redder than dawn. Dawn bled red across the horizon when the Revenant spotted her prey, a Dutch merchantman, the Helena, fat with spice barrels and bolts of cloth. Her sails were square and heavy, her hull broad, sluggish in the wind. Easy pickings, the pirates thought. Too easy. Captain Bartholomew Firth stood on the quarterdeck, coat collar turned against the chill, eyes narrowed. "Run up the flag," he ordered, his voice calm as scripture. The Jolly Roger climbed into the sky, snapping wide in the stiff wind. Its skull leered down at the Helena, bones crossing beneath it like a threat whispered in every language. The crew of the Revenant cheered. They'd seen it work a dozen times. Panic spreading across a deck, muskets dropped, sails furled. Surrender raised before a single cannon fired. But not this time, on the Helena's deck. The Dutch captain, Jan Willems, stood firm, his jaw like carved oak. His men did not flinch. Instead, they hauled on ropes, tightening sails, turning her nose to the wind. And then, with a crack that cut the sea's silence, the Dutch colours rose high above her masts. No surrender. Firth's smile vanished. He'd heard rumours of Willems, a man who'd fought Barbary corsairs in the Mediterranean and refused to bow to terror. A man who claimed he'd rather see his ship sink than be robbed like a lamb. Now, staring across the water, Firth believed it. "Armed the guns," Firth growled. "If they want proof the flag isn't just a painting, we'll give it to them." The Revenant's crew scrambled, pistols loaded, cutlasses drawn, cannon crews ramming powder and shot. The ship bristled like a cornered beast. The Helena fired first. A single bow chaser boomed, and the ball screamed past the Revenant's prow, close enough to spray her deck with shards of salt water. The Dutchmen roared defiance, their voices carrying across the waves. "Bloody fools," muttered Diego, a Spaniard turned pirate, as he checked his match. They'll learn soon enough. The battle was chaos given shape. The Revenant swung broadside, her cannons belching fire and iron. Splinters erupted from the Helena's hull. Men cried out, sails tore. But the Dutch ship answered with her own broadside, and the air turned into thunder and smoke. Firth shouted orders above the din, voice sharp as a whip. Close the distance. Board her. He knew prolonged cannon duels bled pirates dry. Victory came in close quarters, where fear was painted on faces, not flags. Grapnels flew. Lines tightened, and with a bone-shaking crunch, the two ships kissed hull to hull. Pirates swarmed across like a black tide, pistols cracking, blades gleaming. The smell of powder and blood filled the air. On the Helena's deck, Willems met them, sword in hand, coat flapping. He bellowed in Dutch and English alike, "Stand! No surrender to thieves." His men fought with grim resolve, muskets as clubs, knives flashing. I saw it all through eyes wide with terror and awe. The Jolly Roger snapped above, but its promise of terror had failed. Here, men did not see a skull and tremble, they saw flesh and bone. Steel and blood. Firth himself clashed with Willems at the rail. Sparks flew from their blades. "You damn your men," Firth snarled, forcing him back, "and you shame the sea." Willems spat, lunging, his blade carving a line across Firth's sleeve. They fought like two storms colliding, neither yielding. Around them, pirates and Dutch sailors, locked in desperate struggle. Men slipped on blood-slicked planks, some screaming, some silent forever. A barrel of spice split open, cinnamon and cloves spilling across the deck. The air thick with their bitter perfume war and wealth mixing in grotesque contrast. But numbers tell their own tale. The Dutch fought hard, but the pirates were more and hungrier. Slowly, the Helena's men were driven back. Bodies littered the deck, blood soaking into wood that had carried goods and prayers across oceans. At last, Willems faltered. Firth's blade struck his shoulder, spinning him. He dropped to one knee, chest heaving. His men, seeing their captain fall, finally broke. A few tried to flee below decks, others dropped weapons and begged. Firth stood over Willems, sword poised. For a moment, silence fell, broken only by the crackle of burning rigging. "You could have spared them," Firth said coldly. "The flag was mercy. You chose death." Willems spat blood, his eyes fierce. Better death than chains. Firth's blade plunged, and the Dutch captain crumpled. The black flag above rippled in the smoke-filled wind. Not as a symbol of mercy this time, but as a promise kept resists. And you die, the Helena was theirs, but the victory was bitter. Too many men lay dead, pirate and Dutch alike. The spoils were rich, yes, spice, cloth, silver, but the cost was high. Firth walked among the bodies, his face set. His flag had failed once, and it had cost him dearly. That night, the pirates feasted, but the laughter was hollow. The Jolly Roger had been tested, and its power was not absolute. Fear worked on most men, but not all, and those who defied it demanded a price in blood. By the fire's light, Diego turned to me and whispered, "Do you see now? The flag isn't magic. It's only as strong as the cruelty behind it. If men forget that, we bleed." Firth heard, though he gave no reply. His eyes were on the horizon, where more ships waited, more captains who might not bend to terror. And so the question hung in the smoke above us. Had the Jolly Roger truly changed the seas? Or had it only painted a mask over the same old war? The Helena's blood was hardly dry when whispers began to spread across the Caribbean, not just of the raid itself, but of the flag that had flown above her mast. A black banner with a grinning skull that had promised doom and demanded surrender. Some said the Dutch captain who resisted had been a fool. Others called him a hero. But all agreed that flag was no ordinary cloth. It was a weapon. And, like any weapon, others soon wanted their own. The sea became a stage, and every pirate captain a playwright. If Bartholomew Firth had shown that one flag could break a crew without a shot, others realized they could shape their own banners into instruments of terror. Each design was a message, a story told without words, understood in an instant by frightened sailors staring up from their decks. On Tortuga, I saw them painted by hand-oiled sailcloth stretched taut across barrels. Men crouched over with brushes of hog, bristle dipped in tar, SOOT, or crushed bone mixed with whale oil. The air stank of it, pungent and heavy, like death itself, bottled and spread on canvas. Some worked with care, others with manic glee. A skeleton holding an hourglass, reminding victims that their time was nearly spent. A demon with horns, leaping in fire, promising damnation. Even a bleeding heart pierced by a spear, a warning that mercy was not on the table. I remember one captain, Richard Worley, staring at his finished flag, a white skull above 2 crossbones, plain, simple, almost crude. He smiled and said, "It doesn't need art, it needs truth. A skull is what we all are beneath, best to show it naked." His crew cheered, and within weeks, merchantman whispered that Worley's ship was death itself. But it wasn't just theatre. It was calculation. Most pirates knew that fear saved lives, both their victims and their own. A crew that surrendered quickly spared the pirates bloody losses, and spared themselves slaughter. This was the hidden bargain of the Jolly Roger. Terror first, mercy second. If a merchant captain lowered his colours without fight, his men often lived, sometimes even kept their ship, though stripped of cargo. But resist, and the black flag became prophecy fulfilled. I watched this bargain play out one night in the Windward Passage. A French merchantman spotted Edward, England's sloop, and froze when his flag was raised black with a skull above crossed cutlasses. The French captain lowered his sails before the first cannon was lit. England boarded, took his wine in silver, and let the ship go free. No blood spilled, only shaken men whispering prayers as they sailed home. Terror had done the work of gunpowder, but not all flags spoke the same language. Some captains twisted the theatre further. "Let them know we're devils," Charles Vane sneered, his flag showing a skeleton with a spear, stabbing at a bleeding heart. To him, fear wasn't a bargain, it was domination. His victims often found no quarter, even if they begged. For Vane, the flag wasn't warning, it was promise. And then there was Black Sam Bellamy, who flew a flag with a death's head and hourglass, saying with every flap of canvas, "You may live now, but death is coming." His reputation spread so fast that whole crews would surrender on sight, mutinying against captains who dared suggest they fight. The flag was stronger than command. The empire scrambled to make sense of this theatre. In London and Madrid, governors received reports of these strange banners. Descriptions scrawled in frightened hands. A man with horns, a skeleton with sand running, a skull biting a heart. Officials laughed at first, dismissing them as superstition. But then convoys failed to arrive, harbors filled with survivors, trembling from encounters where no shot was fired. Only a flag raised and fear obeyed. Merchants began to demand escorts, and insurance rates soared. And all because of painted rags. The crowns hated that truth more than the pirates themselves, that symbols could undo their empires more effectively than fleets. One evening, while in Port Royal, I overheard two captured pirates discussing the matter. One spat on the ground and said, "A cannonball kills one man. A flag kills 100 without firing." His comrade nodded. "It's not murder, it's mercy. We'd rather frighten them into giving up than slaughter them. The flag saves blood." But as with all weapons, some grew addicted. I recall an encounter with a young captain named Hal Davis, who raised a flag not of skulls or bones, but of himself, his initials painted in white upon black, like a monarch stamping his coin. He strutted about, declaring he was known to God and feared by all men. His theatre wasn't about bargaining, it was vanity, and vanity makes poor armor. He died young, ambushed on the coast of Africa, his flag trampled into the sand. The lesson was clear to those who listened. The Jolly Roger was strongest when it was impersonal, when it spoke not of one man's pride, but of universal fear. Death, time, devils, hearts pierced or burning, images older than language itself. That was the genius. Pirates tapped into symbols every man understood, no matter his tongue or nation, and yet, behind the painted canvas, there was always the truth. If a flag's promise wasn't kept, its power died. Too many spared victims, and whispers would spread that the skull was hollow, the hourglass empty. Too much mercy, and the flag became theatre without teeth. Too much cruelty, and merchants would resolve to fight to the death, knowing surrender brought no safety. It was a knife's edge, balanced between mercy and horror. Firth himself understood this better than most. After the bloody capture of the Helena, he realized that every death weakened the illusion. The more bodies left on the deck, the less likely others would believe surrender meant survival. His flag's power depended on survivors living to tell the tale of how terror alone had won the day. Dead men tell no tales, and dead men spread no fear. One night, as we anchored off a nameless quay, he stood beneath his flag, its skull flapping in the moonlight, and said quietly, almost to himself, "This thing saves more blood than it spills, but only if they believe. If the day comes when no one fears it." He trailed off, eyes dark. That thought hung in the air like storm clouds, because fear is a fragile weapon. Once broken, it is harder to mend than steel or bone. And sure enough, whispers were already rising across the Caribbean. Some said the flags were just cloth, that brave men could resist them. Others claimed new convoys sailed under orders to never surrender, to die rather than let pirates walk away with their goods. The Jolly Roger was a bargain written in shadows, and bargains are only as strong as the men who keep them, which led to the next question, the one every pirate whispered but never spoke aloud. What happens when the flag fails and terror is no longer enough? By the time the Jolly Roger had become the most feared symbol in the Caribbean, the crowns could no longer laugh it off as sailors' superstition. Governors sat in their halls, papers piled high with complaints from merchants, convoys gutted, insurance bled dry, sailors abandoning their posts rather than face the black flag. Spain, England, France, and the Dutch Republic empires, at odds in every other way, suddenly agreed on one thing. The flag had to be broken. But how do you fight a symbol? You cannot burn it like a ship, nor hang it like a man. Fear spreads faster than disease, and each pirate flag told a story. To kill the story, the empires realized they had to make new ones. The first counterstroke came with convoys. No merchantman was to sail alone. Heavily armed escorts, frigates bristling with cannon, would shadow the fat ships laden with sugar, tobacco, and gold. The message was simple. Resistance would be backed by steel. If a black flag rose on the horizon, the convoy would not scatter but close ranks, ready to meet it with broadsides of their own dot. At first, it worked. Off Havana, a squadron of Spanish galleons spotted Charles Vane's brigantine and did not flee. They turned their hulls broadside and opened fire. Vane, seeing the trap, tried to bluff, but his flag no longer commanded the instant surrender it once had. His men cursed as the convoy fought like wolves, and the brigantine barely escaped, sails torn to rags, hull splintered. For weeks after, sailors whispered that the Spanish had laughed at the Jolly Roger. The second stroke was harsher still. When pirates were captured, their punishment was no longer the rope in some quiet corner of a harbor. Now executions became theater as bloody as the flags themselves. In Port Royal, Kingston, and Boston, gibbets were erected along the shore. Captured pirates were hanged in chains, their bodies tarred to resist decay, left to twist and groan in the wind until they fell apart piece by piece. Every merchant crew sailing out of harbor passed beneath these swaying corpses. The message clear: fear the black flag if you wish, but fear the crown more. I remember standing on the docks of Port Royal when they hanged 8 of Vane's men. The sun was merciless, and the crowd gathered in silence, broken only by the creak of ropes. One of the condemned shouted, "Better the Jolly Roger than the King's banner." The trapdoor opened, his body snapped, and the crowd gasped. Children wept, sailors crossed themselves, merchants nodded grimly. The flag had created terror, but the Empire meant to own it. Yet still, the Jolly Roger endured. For every body rotting in chains, another pirate raised the flag higher, daring the crown to silence them. The empires realized that if terror could not be erased, it must be turned. And so they spread whispers of their own. Pamphlets circulated claiming that pirate flags were cowards' tricks, that real sailors laughed at them. Rewards were offered Silverland, pardons for those who betrayed their comrades. Some took the bait, others spat on it, but the greatest threat came from within. Not all pirates agreed on the balance between mercy and cruelty. Some captains, like Edward England, clung to the bargain: terror for surrender, quarter for obedience. Others, like Vane, reveled in savagery, burning ships, killing crews, breaking the unspoken contract that made the flag work. It was in Nassau that the split became undeniable. Over mugs of rum, men argued whether the flag's promise should mean mercy or slaughter. "If we kill them all, the flag means nothing," one sailor cried. "If we spare them all, they'll never fear it," another answered. Knives were drawn, blood spilled, not from merchants this time, but pirates cutting at each other. The crowns saw their chance. Division was the enemy's wound, and they salted it gladly. Royal governors sent pardons to Nassau, promising safe return to any pirate who bent the knee and swore off the Jolly Roger. Some took it. Benjamin Hornigold, once feared under the black flag, accepted the king's pardon and hunted his old comrades with ruthless zeal. He knew their tricks, their hiding places, their sails. To the empire, he was proof that fear could be unmade, and yet the flag did not vanish. Off the coast of West Africa, I watched Howell Davis raise his banner to trick a fort into surrender, pretending to be a royal vessel before revealing the skull beneath. In the Indian Ocean, Olivier Lebu's flew his own version, a skeleton with an hourglass and a heart, striking terror into French and Portuguese crews alike. The symbol had spread beyond the Caribbean, beyond the reach of one empire's laws. Still, the shadows lengthened. Every gallows, every chained corpse, every traitor's pardon chipped away at the myth. Men began to ask, was the Jolly Roger truly invincible, or just a fad, a desperate play in an age of steel and empire? One night, aboard the Revenant, Firth gathered his officers. The flag hung above them, its skull pale in the lantern light. "The crowns mean to break us," he said. "They cannot kill us all at once, so they bleed us by inches. The flag once gave us power. Now it makes us targets." Diego frowned. "Then what? Do we lower it? Sail under false colors?" Firth's eyes narrowed. "No, if we lower it, we admit defeat. But if we keep it, we must change it. Terror must grow teeth again." His words echoed in the silence. The Jolly Roger had begun as mercy through fear. Now, under the noose of empire, it threatened to become something darker. Terror for terror's sake. And so the question sharpened, was the black flag a shield to save blood, or a sword to spill it? The answer would decide whether pirates remained symbols of freedom, or devils of the sea. By the 1720s, the Jolly Roger was no longer a curiosity. It was legend. Sailors spoke of it in hushed tones in dockside taverns, and merchants swore they saw its skull leering at them even in their sleep. But something darker had begun to creep into its meaning. What had started as a tool of mercy Theroux used to save blood was slowly being twisted into something else. Cruelty had put on the mask of the skull, and mercy was being drowned beneath it. The shift was subtle at first. Captains like Edward England had clung to the bargain. Fly the flag, grant quarter if the enemy surrendered. But others, Charles Vane, Calico Jack, Rackham, even the infamous Blackbeard, saw the flag differently. For them, it was not a pact but a performance, a stage for cruelty as much as cunning. If fear was useful, terror was better. If mercy was optional, bloodshed was spectacle. I remember one night off Jamaica's north coast. The moon was pale, and Vane's brigantine, the Ranger, had cornered a small sloop carrying sugar. The sloop's captain struck his colors immediately, surrendering before a shot was fired. By the old bargain, his life and those of his crew should have been spared. But Vane had grown restless, his men drunk on blood and rum. "Hoist them up," he ordered. And before dawn, the merchant sailors dangled from the yardarm, their shadows twitching grotesquely in the lantern glow. The sugar was seized, the ship burned. The black flag above snapped in the wind not as a warning, but as a boast. That night, the flag's meaning changed for every man who saw it. Rumors spread faster than trade winds. Some said Blackbeard himself once tied burning fuses into his beard when raising his flag, appearing on deck like a demon wreathed in smoke and fire. He used terror not just to save blood, but to carve himself into nightmares. Men who saw him swore they would rather drown than fall into his hands. Even Bartholomew Firth, who had once insisted the flag was a shield, began to harden. After losing too many men to stubborn captains who resisted, he no longer offered quarter so freely. "The flag is only as strong as its teeth," he told me one night, staring at the skull above. and teeth must taste blood, or they fall out. But this cruelty was a double-edged cut. For every merchant who surrendered instantly out of fear, there were others who now swore to fight to the last, knowing that the flag promised no safety. The balance that had made the Jolly Roger effective was breaking apart. I recall one such battle in the Windward Passage. A convoy of 3 English merchantmen spotted our sails and the flag rising black against the sky. Instead of panic, their captains lashed their ships together, turning them into a floating fortress. No quarter, they shouted, their muskets bristling. The fight was brutal. Cannon roared, grapeshot tore through men and masts alike, and when the smoke cleared, 1 merchantman had sunk, but 2 pirate ships were burning. The flag had lost its power that day, traded for blood and ash. The cruelty also corroded the pirates themselves. Crews once united under the Articles began to splinter. Men argued about whether captives should be spared or slain, whether mercy was weakness or wisdom. I saw fights break out over it, knives drawn among men who had shared bread and blood for years. The flag no longer bound. The mitt divided them, and worse, the empires turned this cruelty into propaganda. Pamphlets printed in London, Madrid, and Boston painted pirates as demons, fiends who murdered helpless sailors and burned ships for sport. They showed woodcut images of the Jolly Roger above scenes of slaughter, telling merchants and common folk alike that pirates were not rebels, but monsters. Every cruel act made the Crown's work easier. One evening, in a smoky tavern in Nassau, I overheard 2 old buccaneers talking. One spat into his mug and said, the flag was meant to scare them into giving up quick. Now lads think it means slaughter. It won't be long before no one lowers their colours at all. His companion, a scarred Frenchman, nodded grimly. And when that day comes, we'll be hanging from the king's gibbet. He was right. The flag that once saved lives had become a noose. Pirates who had relied on fear to keep their blades clean now found themselves drowning in the very blood they sought to avoid. And though the skull still leered from every mast, its meaning was poisoned one night. After a raid that left a merchant ship in flames and her crew butchered, I found Mary Killigrew, fierce navigator, who had once sworn the flag was freedom, staring up at it as it snapped in the wind. Her face was pale in the moonlight. "It's not our flag anymore," she said softly. "It belongs to the devils now. And devils don't build utopias, they burn them." Her words haunted me, because deep down, every man aboard knew she was right. The black flag was no longer just a theatre of fear. It had become a theatre of death. And once mercy dies, terror devours even its own. The question none of us dared to ask was simple and terrible. Had the Jolly Roger doomed us all, not by the noose of empire, but by the cruelty we ourselves had stitched into its canvas? By the late 1720s, the Jolly Roger had reached its peak and its breaking point. Once, its skull had promised a bargain, terror for surrender, quarter for obedience. Now it was tangled in blood, corrupted by cruelty, and the empires had seized the moment. No longer were they chasing ragged brigantines with patrol sloops. Now they sent frigates, men-o'-wars, and privateers armed with royal pardons. The sea became a trap in Port Royal. They hanged 12 in a single day, their bodies tarred and left to twist over the harbour. In Boston, men were chained along the coast until the gulls picked them clean. In Cape Coast Castle, captured crews were branded, broken, and sold into the very slavery they once defied. The black flag that had terrified the world was now pinned up in courtrooms as evidence. paraded before crowds as trophies. I remember one execution in particular, Stede Bonnet, the so-called gentleman pirate, his Jolly Roger, white skull over crossed bones, was dragged before the gallows, displayed like a criminal in its own right. Bonnet wept, insisting he had been driven to piracy by desperation, but the crowd shouted him down. His men dangled by noon, and his flag was burned that night in a public bonfire. The message was clear. The skull was no longer terror, it was target. Yet still, some pirates refused to let it die quietly. Blackbeard himself made his last stand in 1718, with his flag snapping above him, a skeleton raising a toast to the devil while spearing a bleeding heart. He fought like the flag made flesh cutlass, slashing, pistols roaring, face shrouded in smoke. They say it took 5 musket balls and 20 cuts to bring him down, and even then he fought until his head was severed. His flag fell with him, but the legend only grew. For a while, it seemed as if the Jolly Roger might outlive the men who flew it. Survivors claimed the skull still carried power. In Madagascar, Olivier Levasseur flew a variant of it as he looted Portuguese treasure. In West Africa, it was hoisted to frighten forts into surrender. Even in the Indian Ocean, whispers told of black flags fluttering like omens, but each victory was smaller, each story thinner. The empires tightened their grip, their navies patrolling with ruthless efficiency. The age of buccaneers was being strangled, one rope, one battle, one betrayal at a time. I sat once with Mary Killigrew, staring at the skull above our mast, ragged now, its paint peeling, its grin faded. She traced the cloth with her fingertips and said, "It saved us once. Then it cursed us. But look," she pinched the fabric until the skull warped, twisted into a blur. Maybe it was never ours to begin with. Maybe it was always theirs fears, and fear serves no master. Her words rattled me, because even then the flag's meaning had slipped beyond the men who raised it. Was it a warning? A curse? A memory? Or had it become something else entirely, a ghost sewn into cloth, haunting the sea long after the pirates themselves had gone? When the last great hangings came in Nassau, dozens at once, the Jolly Roger was there too, held aloft by soldiers who mocked it. They thought they had destroyed it, but the crowd sailors, slaves, merchants, looked on in silence. Some spat, some wept, some even smiled, as if remembering that, for a brief, impossible moment, a skull had defied the crowns of the world. And here's the strangest truth. After the nooses tightened, after the bodies swayed, after the black flags were burned to ash, the skull and crossbones did not vanish. It spread. Sailors carved it into wood, painted it on tavern walls, etched it into gravestones. It appeared on smugglers' coins, on rebel banners, on the dreams of boys who longed for the sea. The Jolly Roger had become what no empire could kill. An idea and ideas don't drown. So when you see that grinning skull today on shirts, on ships, on the silver screens, you are not just looking at a relic of piracy. You are staring into the ghost of a promise, a warning that fear is stronger than steel, and that men with nothing to lose can terrify the world without firing a shot. But the final mystery remains, one that even I cannot answer. Some say the very first Jolly Roger, the original skull, painted in bone ash and tar, was never captured, never burned. They whisper it was carried east into the far seas, and that even now, on storm-ridden nights, a black flag rises on the horizon where no ship should be. Crews vanish without a trace, their vessels found adrift with no soul aboard, only a single tattered banner snapping in the wind. Is it just a story? Or has the Jolly Roger outlived the men who made it, sailing on forever as the sea's most enduring ghost? I leave that to you. Perhaps the Jolly Roger was never about pirates at all. Perhaps it was always about us, our fear of death, our hunger for freedom, our fascination with rebellion. Pirates are gone, but the skull still grins. The question is, what does it grin at now? If you thought this tale was wild, wait until you hear the next untold pirate story. A single map promised the world's greatest treasure, and cursed every soul who touched it. Subscribe, and I'll take you there.